I'm really honored, Dr. Kevin Knuth. Thank you so much for coming on Coffee and UFOs. How are you? Oh, yeah, I think you're muted there.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, yeah, honored again. Thank you. Caroline Corey was on some months ago, and I know you were involved in one of her documentaries.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, she highlighted UAPX, and so why is UAPX such an important entity? Well, I'll say this starting with your bio because you are leading that group. Dr. Knuth is a professor in the Department of Physics at the University of Albany, SUNY, and is the editor-in-chief of the journal Entropy, MDPI. He is a former NASA research scientist, having worked for 4 years at NASA Ames Research Center in the Intelligent Systems Division, designing artificial intelligence algorithms for astrophysical data analysis. He has over 20 years of experience in applying Bayesian and maximum entropy methods to the design of machine learning algorithms for data analysis applied to the physical sciences. His current research interests include the foundation of physics, quantum information, inference and inquiry, autonomous robotics, and the search for and characterization of extrasolar planets. He's very busy. He has published over 90 peer-reviewed publications and has been invited to give over 80 presentations in 14 countries. Kevin, we should emphasize that you are now a professor, and you, like you said before, you did so as a UFO investigator while taking such a subject seriously. How was it, and how has academia received you?
Very well, actually. I've
Okay,
been
cool.
I've been pleasantly surprised. No, our department is quite collegial, and so they were very supportive when I started studying UAPs.
Hmm.
I gave kind of an introductory talk before I studied them back in like 2015. It was after I realized that after I saw Robert Hastings' press conference, which I saw on YouTube some years later. But it was originally held in 2010 on UFOs and nuclear weapon sites. But I saw it first in 2015, and I had heard about such incursions when I was a graduate student at Montana State University. I'd heard about them happening at Malmstrom Air Force Base back in
Right.
'88. I knew about this for 30 years before I even saw anything about it on the internet.
Yeah.
And when I realized that, that this was a problem, um, it the fact that I had known about this for 30 years already made me realize, wow, this could really be a big problem. I mean, the fact that everybody thinks that this is nonsense and isn't doing anything about it, isn't taking it seriously, it could be disastrous. So,
Yeah.
and in fact,
Well,
I think Tim Gallaudet, Admiral Gallaudet, said this at the either he or Lou Elizondo, one of the two, said that not taking this seriously could be an intelligence failure on the order of 9/11, which actually I would say probably bigger than that if it went bad. Um, so we don't know what the situation is, and when I realized that this was what was going on, I thought, well, I should look into this, and I did, and I found it was really quite interesting and complicated, and I
mhm.
gave a presentation to my physics department before I was studying them, and I had already had tenure at that point, so I wasn't in danger of losing my job exactly.
Right. Right. That helps.
But but I think my talk went really well. It was a packed room. Um, it was actually too many people for the room than the fire code allowed. People were sitting cross-legged on the floor right up to the front screen, um, and which I found was interesting. And several of my colleagues afterwards said, "Wow, this is actually really interesting. I never thought it was this cool."
Do you think it's because how you framed it differently than how they've otherwise?
I think that's part of it. I think that a lot of people haven't seen any real evidence or haven't heard professionals who've encountered these things talk about them. So I had
Yeah.
played um, the so General Huertas, Oscar Santa Maria Huertas from Peru, who actually fired rounds at a UFO. I played
Oh
his
yeah, yeah.
testimony
Okay.
at one of the conferences.
Hmm.
I played the testimony of the gentlemen who were involved in the in Bentwater's case,
Okay.
the
Yeah.
landing in England, and I think that really got people interested, and I pointed out that some of the first sightings in the early 1940s were of disks approaching weather balloons that atmospheric scientists had actually launched.
Hmm.
So we knew they weren't weather balloons from day one. Day one, we've known they were no weather balloons
Yeah.
back in 1946. So it's a little disheartening to hear people now say, "Oh, they're probably all just weather balloons." And like, we've known this for decades that they aren't.
Yeah, and it is fascinating when you hear these kind of recordings or interviews of like Charles Holt and John Burroughs,
Right.
because that was special because he actually recorded it on site, as they were communicating. So you had the radio communication. Uh,
Exactly. That's amazing. Yeah.
it is that brings a level of um, realness to it. But I think that for the most part, even when you read books on the subject or watch documentaries, when I watched your Soul Foundation presentation, I realized that the books and documentaries and the other presentations at Soul don't do a great job, and I understand why, but they don't always do a great job of presenting the data and the raw data. And because if you don't understand engineering, if you don't have a mind for math, it's kind of hard to follow along. But your presentation, I watched it several times, the Soul Foundation presentations, because and I know in your presentation you mentioned that you'd done some background on this, meaning someone else had already researched cars stalling out when there's a UFO that comes by, but then you pick that up. That was fascinating because in UFO lore, we've heard this for so long, right? The car goes out when the UFO approaches and then suddenly it restarts again. So for those listening that didn't hear the talk that I heard, can you package that in a smaller way, orally, so that we can
Oh
understand?
yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think that's one of the features that I had always found to be rather improbable or impossible.
Hmm.
I remember when um, so Close Encounters of the Third Kind,
Yeah.
the fictional movie came out in December of 1976 or
Seven,
77,
seven,
77,
seven. Yeah.
December of 77. It was just after Star Wars. Star Wars was like May 26th that year. So I had seen Star Wars, 17 times at that point in the theater,
So
and
you got to
then
see it in the theater.
originally,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
I was 12, so very impressionable, and
Yeah.
and yeah, so yeah, that's yeah, so and that was in being 12. I lived only a few blocks from the mall, so I could walk to the movie theater and
Yeah.
with my friend, and
Yeah.
yeah, so I think we saw Star Wars many times, Grease a couple times, and Bad News Bears. I think those were the three big movies that summer.
I
But
saw
then
those all on TV, but yeah.
Right, and then Close Encounters came out that winter, that Christmas,
Hmm.
and and yeah, it was a fun movie, but I didn't like it because, well, it wasn't Star Wars. There weren't laser beams, and they weren't fighting when there weren't robots. It wasn't Star Wars, and
Sure.
I
Sure.
was 12 and impressionable, right? So, um, but
Well, it does
and
kind of
then
have adult themes in it,
oh,
actually.
it's very adult,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's actually very realistic. Now since I've been studying UAPs, I've
Hmm.
gone back and watched Close Encounters a few times. Spielberg knew exactly what he was doing. He nailed it so many ways,
Yeah.
and just even the strange effects of people having visions of things and being led to this place. I mean, things like that happen are reported as well.
Yeah.
So he was on top of it, and at the time I thought this is just very weird. I don't know what to make of this.
Hmm.
And then the scene with Richard Dreyfuss where when he first encounters the UFOs, they have the power outages, and he's going to repair or help with some of this. He's an electrician,
Yeah.
and he's pulled over on the side of the road, and the UFO comes up behind him, and it looks like a car, and then goes over him. And that whole scene, it shuts his car down. There's gravitational and inertial effects. You've got a lot
Hmm.
going on. The electrical system of the car is affected, or the truck, um,
Yeah.
and and it ends up killing the engine, and then later when the UFO leaves, the car restarts, or the truck restarts. It wasn't a car; it was a truck.
Yeah. And he didn't manually restart it. It just.
And he didn't. Yeah. So there were some. So now that I've learned a little bit, you know, I'm going to be the physicist who ruins everything by talking about the inaccuracies in the film, right? this is any sci-fi. You don't really want to watch sci-fi movies with a physicist because we're used to just spoiling all the fun. So I'm going to spoil some of the fun, but I think in this case it's informative. So, Richard Dreyfuss's character was driving a Ford F-150, right? So that's a diesel engine. Diesel engines are not affected by UFOs. They are rarely shut down. I think I've only read of one case where a diesel engine was shut down by a UFO.
Okay.
Gasoline engines are shut down, not diesel engines. So the thinking is that the spark plugs are being shorted out. The hypothesis that McCampbell put forward back in 1983, the paper I came across that I was very interested in, was that the electric field around the UFO is so high that you're basically ionizing the air. You're ionizing the air, which is often why you see plasma around UFOs. They're shiny, they glow, they're blurry. You can't get a clear photograph when you got plasma surrounding an object. That's not going to happen. You're not going to get clear photographs. Neil deGrasse Tyson, please pay some attention. There's physical reasons why we can't get clear pictures, and those physics is interesting. So, and the physics is important. So these things are ionizing the air. Some skeptics will jump in and say, no, wait a minute, the car is a Faraday cage. And they're like, no, it's not a Faraday cage. The whole bottom of the car is wide open. You can't put metal on the top and say it's a Faraday cage. It has to be completely surrounded. The car is not a Faraday cage. Sorry. So the UFO is basically ionizing the air, shorting out the spark plugs, so the car dies. A gasoline engine dies. Diesel engines don't have spark plugs. Not going to kill a diesel engine. So then, now the interesting thing is that, according to McCampbell's hypothesis, was that with the air being ionized, you've got the switches in the distributor cap, which are basically controlling which piston's going to fire next, are also being shorted out. So that the one that it's lined up to fire is being shorted out. So you have current flowing through the primary of the ignition coil. You've got a magnetic field around the ignition coil, and it's shorted out. It's just sitting there waiting. The UFO leaves. The air is no longer ionized. That switch opens up again. The current stops flowing in the primary coil. Field collapse induces a current into the secondary, which sends a high voltage pulse to the spark plug. And 10% of the time, if you work out the cycle of the engine, 10% of the time, that piston will be ready to fire, and 10% of the time it does, and that will start the engine again. So the other inaccuracy in the film, when you see Richard Dreyfuss's truck start up again, you hear the engine turn over. You hear the electric motor going and turning the engine over. That's not what happens. The piston fires and it starts. But
so you wouldn't hear that.
It wouldn't happen on a diesel.
Right.
Yeah, you wouldn't hear that. You would just hear boom, boom, and the thing would run. Yeah.
Okay. Have you sent an email to Steven Spielberg?
No, I've not. I don't want to criticize the movie. I love that movie. I absolutely love it. Yeah, it's fantastic.
No, I love it too. And I'm excited
he did a fantastic job. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm excited about the next film. I'm wondering what this is going to look like. Yeah.
It seems to me, maybe I'm reading into this, but it seems to me he's been inspired, in the past like 7 years of 7 years now. 2017 when the article came out, and
that's right. It's been 7 years. That's right.
Yeah.
Wow.
So moving in that direction, it seemed to reignite his interest in the subject, and that's great. Speaking
he
of,
was behind Netflix Encounters that I was on too, so I can't be too critical of him.
Okay, fair enough.
That would go badly for me.
But you know that he then, and I'm sure now, they do have scientists that they call on for what's the word I'm looking for? Consultants. Thank you. Yeah. And so, I'm sure he's going to do his best, to make it as grounded as that first film. Speaking of, getting the word out and attracting people to this subject. I mean, just in a week's time, we had a House Oversight Committee. Yesterday? Then we had the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee hearing. Uh, there's a lot of attention square in the center of a political um, discussion, bipartisan. What's your take on that?
Congress, some people in Congress, some of them who have some clearance, have already seen more data than the rest of us.
Hmm.
And it's very clear to them that something strange is going on and they want to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
It's also clear that there has been, um, I know people don't like conspiracy theories, but there's been a cover up. I mean, the government has not come clean about these things. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, if I pick something as controversial as Roswell, which I'm loath to do, the U.S. government has come out with like 10 explanations. Well, not 10, maybe 5 explanations for Roswell.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, you can't keep coming up with a new explanation and then expect us to believe it because the new one means that all the old ones were false.
Well,
My
and
my
yeah.
my one of the explanations was that I think this was in 1992. The Air Force came out and said that they were testing a Mars lander, and then the disc that was seen was the back shell of the Mars lander.
Hmm.
Who in the right mind is testing a Mars lander 10 years before Sputnik? Nobody's spending money on a Mars lander before we launched a satellite into space.
Right. Right.
Nobody. I'm sorry. Nobody would do that.
Yeah.
That is the most ridiculous explanation I've ever heard. And the fact that the Air Force expected us to believe this, and some people did believe it. Oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. I'm gonna,
Hmm.
that's ridiculous. But what it says is that they've been lying. They've been intentionally making these things up and lying, and
Yeah.
they've been doing
Yeah.
a bad job of it, which is, I lose respect for them in multiple dimensions because of this. Because they not only are they lying, but they're not good at it.
Well, yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know what to make of this. It makes me worry. But
It's tough if your job is to lie, right? I
that is
mean,
tough. That is
yeah.
tough if your job is to lie. You
Yeah.
probably shouldn't be lying is really what the truth of it. And in fact, the most probable explanation then becomes the first one. And the first thing the Air Force ever said about this was that they captured a disc. They published that. That was the official statement from that Air Force base, that Army Air Force base. And,
Yeah.
the Air Force came in and quashed it the next day. Which one do I believe? I believe it's probably the first one. I mean,
Well, the most recent in recent years explanation, debunking has been it was a psyops, program against the Russians to
well, there was
confuse them.
Project Mogul is what they say. The problem is that Project Mogul was run by a physicist, an atmospheric physicist from NYU.
Hmm.
We have his records. There was no balloon launched in early June. They didn't launch because of bad weather, according to his records. So there was no balloon up. There was no balloon to come down.
Yeah.
And we
Well,
have we have those records. I mean, those aren't classified. Those are his notes, his personal notes. Those weren't classified, and we know what happened. There was no
yeah.
balloon to come down. It could not have been Project Mogul. And I'm sorry, if they're going to launch a balloon, so what was Project Mogul? Project Mogul is they had a balloon
Hmm.
that they had sound detection equipment on to measure sound waves from a nuclear blast, and you
Yeah.
wanted to have those at a certain altitude in the atmosphere because the atmosphere at different temperatures will channel those sound waves there, kind of like you can hear whales across the Pacific. And the problem was, the real research problem was, how do you get a balloon to hover at a certain altitude?
Right.
Because if you just let a balloon go, it keeps going, but then the air pressure goes down, so the balloon volume gets bigger, it goes up, the less dense, it keeps going up and up and up until the balloon pops. That was the big problem. So Project Mogul, the purpose of Project Mogul was to figure out how to keep a balloon hovering at a certain altitude. And and so if you're going to launch one on June 1st, and then the explanation is that's what crash landed on a ranch a few miles away
Hmm.
at the end of June. Are you really telling me that a balloon hanging out at 50,000 feet is just going to hover over that county for a month?
Right.
No, there's 200-mile-an-hour winds up there. There's a jet stream. That thing is gone. We know. We track the
Yeah.
Chinese balloons. We know how they go. The Project Mogul balloons over Roswell wouldn't have stayed over Roswell for any period of time. It
Yeah.
was
And they had
ridiculous. The whole thing is just it's such a stupid explanation. And
right.
when my physicist colleagues believe it, I want to slap them upside the head. It's like, don't throw your brain out the window when they tell you these things. You got to be as skeptical of the skeptics as you are of everybody else.
But right, but don't you think that's more of an emotional response?
It's totally emotional. Yeah, they're not being rational, they're being emotional. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Something crazy happened at Roswell because of, and you know this, because of the hyperbolic military response.
mhm,
The military response was hyperbolic. They threatened people's lives. The sheriff was detained for 5 days and his family was threatened.
yes.
Why would a military in America do that to an American? What's actually going on here? What's the real story? That's what I would like to know. I'm not saying it's aliens. I'm not going to say it's aliens. I don't have any evidence for that.
Mhm.
But something happened that was interesting.
Also, the
Um,
weather balloons, didn't they have radio scones or some like the
yeah,
equipment to listen
it was
for
equipment
like
to listen for the nuclear blast. Yeah,
nuclear, but then that was like a separate piece.
it's a
So it was
separate piece,
so,
right?
yeah. So I mean, those are the kinds of things that it's
But you're not
human
going to
made,
threaten. But you're not going to
right?
threaten a sheriff over that. That's ridiculous. Yeah, not going to
Right,
threaten their
right.
life. I mean, what is a sheriff going to do with a piece of electrical equipment?
Yeah.
Nothing.
I have to say, Kirsten Gillibrand, and representing New York. All right.
Yeah,
Um, really proud of her work here. She was not mincing words. Um, she was most definitely in her introduction at the Armed Services Committee subcommittee hearing. She was not leaning away or being um, biased towards a conventional explanation for these things. It seemed to me that she has seen things and is convinced that there's really something truly anomalous occurring in our skies, and she was pushing towards that. Now, part of the conversation that they had during with John Kozlowski, who's the new director of Arrow, what was bringing in some of those firsthand witnesses, many of which we assume David Grush had spoken with, bring them back, which I find really, they were re-inviting some of those people back.
right.
And I have to wonder, it could be reading into this. Do you think that Kozlowski is more sensitive and more of a believer uh, than Sean Kirkpatrick, who has now left,
I don't think you have to be a believer. That's the thing.
or believing that they're truth telling? Yeah.
There's plenty of data out there at this point.
Mm, mhm.
We have plenty of data now. These things are not only a little weird; they're very weird. Um, they're
Yeah.
very anomalous. The speeds and accelerations that they've been measured to fly at are literally astronomical.
Yeah.
They are, and in fact, in the paper that I wrote on their speeds and accelerations, I pointed out that with the accelerations that we've measured,
Yeah.
and in fact, this has been known since the 1950s. And Herman Oberth, father of modern rocketry, he was the mentor to Wernher von Braun. Herman Oberth gave a talk on UFOs in 1954, and he noted that they have been measured. They had had over 50 radar measurements of UFOs traveling at more than 19 kilometers a second, which is 40,000 miles an hour through the air. No sonic boom, no fireball. This
Yeah.
total very anomalous. I have no idea how that could happen. And he knew this in the 1950s. 1954, he gave a talk on this. And 40,000 miles an hour is how fast the New Horizons probe that flew past Pluto is going.
Right.
These things have
Right.
been known to move at spacecraft speeds since the 1950s.
Yeah.
So
Or, or
so
or even earlier. I mean, if you go by the Foo Fighter
or
report.
even yeah, maybe
Yeah.
possibly earlier. Yeah. And so for Arrow to maintain that we don't have any evidence that these things are non-human is just ridiculous. It's silly.
Now, during the hearing, He did give an explanation, the same explanation that Mick West gave for the Aguadilla Puerto Rico
Yeah,
UAP.
balloon. Wow. Have you ever seen a balloon with a candle go underwater and come back out and maintain speed? Went underwater at 100 miles an hour, didn't make a splash, then comes back out. Give me
See,
a
their
break.
explanation was that it was like it was a hot. One side of the object was hot, one side was cold. So as it was rotating, when the cooler side, I think it was the cooler side, faced the camera, it would blip. It would blend in with the other cooler pixels, so it
Yeah,
would appear to disappear.
you put a candle in a balloon, the whole thing's hot. I'm sorry. It isn't going to stay in the air if it's not hot. It floats because the air inside is hot. One side can't be cold. The
Yeah,
whole thing would tip. The cold side would be below and the hot side would be
would
above.
be up.
I
Right.
mean,
Okay.
both of these guys are supposed to be physicists. Come on.
And
I
that
mean,
could
let's
sunlight
do our
have
jobs.
could sunlight have done any? I guess it wouldn't matter if it's rotating, but could
No,
sunlight warm up
sunlight
one
isn't going
side?
to make a bunch of difference. No.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So
Their explanation is silly. SCU, Robert Powell, and the guys at SCU did uh, what is it, a couple 100-page report on
oh,
the
it was a
Aguadilla case.
huge, yeah.
Tons of
Yeah.
information. They analyzed the crap out of that, and for Arrow to be saying it's a balloon like Mick West, Mick West doesn't do statistics. He just visually compares videos. I mean, that's not science.
Yeah, I want to say thank you, Fan Tomas, for the super chat. We have a question or comment. Notice there is a clear avoidance of other witnesses who are credible. It isn't likely a Chinese lantern or a balloon. At this point, none of the agencies are in the fields. It's armchair debunking, Kev.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Thank you, Fanto. I really,
Yeah.
really appreciate that. Yeah.
All they do is they come up with an excuse. It doesn't even have to be a good one. Then they just say it's been debunked. It's been debunked, and everybody just repeats the phrase "it's been debunked." Well, no, it hasn't been debunked, because a true skeptic, is skeptical both of their beliefs and others.
Right. I'm
And
writing something right now on
yeah,
that exact subject, Kevin, on debunking the debunker. So I'm taking notes as we're
yeah,
speaking here.
I'm skeptical
Yeah.
of the skeptics. The skeptics come up with the worst explanations, and
Yeah.
they cherry pick the data. They explain one little part of the video, not the whole thing. They don't
Right.
explain what the radar picked up. They don't explain what the pilot has witnessed.
Well, let me,
That's not an explanation. You have to use all of the data. Your
so this is
explanation
this.
has to include all of it.
Yes. And so psychologically, when I was listening to John Kozlowski give his testimony, I thought this was really interesting. I kind of feel like he's playing both sides, not in a nefarious way. He's trying to be balanced. So he did the Aguadilla presentation, and we can disagree with that. Then he mentioned the Go Fast video, and I agree that parallax definitely has an effect on the
It isn't.
appearance,
It isn't
but
going fast. People have
but it
been. Yeah,
doesn't
oh
matter,
my God,
right? That's the
people have been
point.
saying this the whole time, and it drives me nuts. The video happens to be called "Go Fast." Nobody's claiming
No one's
that
like
it's
it's
going 40,000 miles an hour. Nobody said
right.
that. We don't know how fast it's going because there's parallax. Exactly. I didn't look at that case because I'm not knowing the distance to the object and not knowing how far about the object is above the water. You can't tell the speed. It could not. It could be that it's not going very fast, but that's not the important point.
Right, but that's the
The
thing. So
important point is there's no flight surfaces. There's no clear method of propulsion. That's the important point. And it's not a seagull. I'm sorry, it's not a seagull.
right, so that's the interesting thing. So he parallax, sure, I can agree with that, but that doesn't explain everything else. So he
It
only picked
doesn't
that
yet.
one point to
Right.
present. But then on the other hand, he shared this story. Of course, it's a story without video. I'm just going to play it here so everybody can hear.
A law enforcement officer out west where he observed a large orange orb floating several hundred feet above the ground a couple miles away. He went to investigate, and as he was pulling up to the location where he thought would be below the orb, about 40 to 60 meters away from some object the area was well lit. He saw a blacker than black object. He said it was about the size of a Prius, 4 to 6 feet wide. And as he got 40 to 60 meters away from the object, it tilted up about 45 degrees, and then it shot up vertically. He says 10 to 100 times faster than any drone he's ever seen before. And it did that without making a sound, as far as he could tell from inside of his vehicle. And just as it left his field of view through his windshield, then it emitted very bright red and blue lights that illuminated the inside of his vehicle as brightly as if someone had set off fireworks just outside his vehicle or street flares.
Yeah, and so he left that as a truly unexplainable.
And I applaud him for
report.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was pleased to hear that. And I mean, I'm a little disappointed to hear about the poor explanations for Agua Dia and Go Fast, but I would applaud him for presenting that case. And
Yeah.
there are tons of cases like this. And as I mentioned at Seoul, we know that these things are extremely luminous. The and Jacques Vallée even has a paper that he's written on a case in Haynesville, Louisiana, I believe. I think it's Louisiana or it's Mississippi, down in southern U.S., where a physicist had encountered. I think the physicist just saw the bright light. The bright light was in the woods on the side of the road that they was driving on, and as he approached the light, he compared it to his headlights and realized that this is really bright. You don't want to
Yeah.
get anywhere near this light. It's going to burn trees, that kind of bright. And so he turned around and went the other way and reported it, and later investigated, and they found the clearing that this thing had landed in and had scorched the tree bark around the clearing. And they've now analyzed the tree bark to determine how bright that light would have had to have been. And very typical for some of these bright UFOs, it is hundreds of megawatts. What you need 100 megawatt light for, I have no idea. Could it be a byproduct of their propulsion system? That's possible, but then you have to be amazed a little bit that your byproduct it would be a waste energy at 100 megawatts of waste energy for your propulsion system. What kind of energies are these guys working with? I mean, this is really spectacular.
Yeah, we have heard of other cases in the past where there have been singed, brush or trees or whatever
And
surrounding it.
people blinded and burned, sunburned, and all these things. Yeah, that
Ye-
happens. That actually happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you don't want to get too close to one of these things, and you don't want to look directly at them when they're close. They're very bright. Yeah.
Right. So there's different explanations we've heard that some people suspect either radiation, then you have heat light, then you have combustion sometimes. So why do we have these different types of energy? Do you think all these variations of either propulsion or energy of some sort?
Well, it's hard to know what's going on. I mean, we really need to collect more data, and we need to carefully collect data on these things. And it's hard to generalize because it's not clear that some of these appear to be craft,
Hmm.
and it's not clear that they're all the same kind of craft. Just like so how does a UFO fly? I can't answer that the same way I can't answer how a car works, because it could be an electric engine, it could be a gas engine, it could be a diesel engine, it could be hybrid.
Yeah.
You don't know. It could be steam engine. We don't know what they could use. And in
Well,
fact, one of the interesting things that I've noted and
mhm.
would like to look into further is the fact that when they're landed, they never just go from the landing state and shoot off into the sky. That doesn't happen.
Mm.
They always lift up slowly to about 30 feet, hover for a second, and then shoot off into the sky. So it's almost as if they have to clear the ground somewhat for some distance, and
Right.
then kick something else in, and then they use another kind of propulsion. And what's interesting about that to me is that the technique that they use to get the 30 feet off the ground is different in different cases. So in the Lonnie Zamora case in New Mexico,
You're reading my mind. Yeah.
in that case, it used rocket engines. It used rockets to get off the ground, which actually
Yes.
burnt the ground and
Yes.
singed the bushes, and then hovered and then shot off into the sky.
Right, and it
In
also
the
had
case,
landing gear too.
and it had landing gear. And then
Hmm.
a case in France that was mentioned in the Cometa report, the object lifted up, but it seemed electrical because there was high electric fields, because all the grass became electrified and bent toward the object
Okay.
as it hovered, and then it shot off into the sky. So it appears that they used different techniques to get off the ground.
Wait, which one was
Whether
that? Was that the farmer case that Valet?
Yeah, there was one of the cases with the I can't remember what the grain is called. It's not amaranth. I don't remember. But it was a kind of, yeah, there was a particular plant that they then actually did experiments with to see how much electric field you'd need
Yeah.
to be able to manipulate the graphs like that. And so they were actually able to measure what that electric field strength probably was.
So the Travis Walton case, all the 6 men, and I believe Travis as well, but all the 6 other crew, and Travis, when they saw the craft, there was a kind of a buzzing sound that was coming up from it, and they could
I think they
feel.
reported there was a buzzing sound, and it felt that the air was electrified. Yeah.
Yeah, and they felt like it was something kind of throbbing through their bodies too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And it
what
could
could
have been ionizing the air. I mean, you could have had that happening. I think they were in a truck.
Yeah.
They were in a truck, so they
Mhm.
probably had a diesel engine and were protected from stalling out.
Yeah.
But
Good
but
point.
that could be why that Travis Walton was shocked. Like a lightning bolt hit him. If the air is electrified like that and he gets too close, that could be very dangerous. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now I have to ask Mike Rogers if they had a diesel. I'm sure they did, but now I'm really
That's a good
curious.
question. Ask
Yeah.
if they had a diesel engine, because I would expect that being that close to a
Yeah.
UFO, feeling electrified, that it probably would have killed a gasoline engine.
Are any of these craft? I know everyone asks this question, but I'd love to hear your point of view. Are any of these craft ours or reverse engineered ours?
I think the answer is going to be messy.
Mhm.
I think that some of them are not ours. Some of them could be ours. Some of them could be reverse engineered. Some of them could be captured.
Mhm.
I think there are different accounts where there is some evidence for all of those cases. So I don't think it's going to be simple at all. And then plus we don't know how many different kinds of craft or how many different races could be coming here if they're not human.
Yeah. During the hearing, they did mention that they're going to add a CMS, a CMS case management system, to our website at some point, which I think it's great, and it's going to be for the public apparently as well. I volunteer for MUFON. We have a case management system. People are entering reports every day. Do we have a problem in that we have now a multitude of platforms that are intaking reports, and it's ending up over here and over here, and unintentionally kind of stovepiping these events? Is that a problem with the research and the data and analysis?
That's a good question. I think you could find people who could argue both ways. I take a more, I don't know, I'm more thankful that we're actually recording these things. So I'm not too worried about where it's being recorded as long as others can get access to them. So I think that would be helpful.
Okay, so the next question is, in your experience now, and watch the documentary that you did with Caroline Corey, but
Mhm.
since then, what kind of units and tech are you hoping to develop or have developed to really help you capture these things?
Right. Yeah. The film we did with Carolyn Corey, and I thank her for supporting us. That was wonderful and very helpful. That was our first mission.
Oh,
And
really?
it was
Okay.
our first mission ever. Yeah. So um, we have a little joke in physics. If it were research, if we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be called research. So so
Okay.
that really kind of sums up what was happening in Catalina.
Yeah.
Um,
And the documentary is called "The Tear in the Sky."
yeah, and of course we did our best, and but we made mistakes. We made lots of mistakes, and I remember talking to my colleague Matthew Shadagas
Mhm.
when we were up on the rooftop, and he was like, "Oh, I sure hope we get some data on UFOs." And of course, I'm feeling the same thing, right? And I said, but you know what we're going to do? We're going to learn what not to do.
Right.
That's what's really going to happen on this mission.
That's
And
how it starts, right?
and that's really
Yeah.
how it starts. I mean, that's true. We learned exactly what not to do. Um,
That's my whole life, learning
yeah,
what not to do.
what you don't do you don't get a separate film crew in amongst your equipment, moving it
Mm,
all around once you've placed it. That's a problem.
I see. Okay. Yep.
you you make sure you have recorded the positions and the orientations of all your equipment, and you maintain that. You make sure that they're constantly getting power, that somebody doesn't accidentally unplug something,
Yeah.
which is what actually happened to the FLIR cameras when that hole appeared in the clouds. They had been unplugged at 10 p.m. Nothing mysterious happened. Somebody unplugged them, and we didn't notice until 4 a.m. I think everybody had fallen asleep, and the batteries ran out. So nothing mysterious happened to them at all. So we learned you have to keep precise timing of all of your data, so that when something does happen, like the hole in the clouds, and you record radiation events, you know that they happened at the same time. Our timing was probably about plus or minus 2 seconds, which I would
Mhm.
have rather been in the millisecond range. And I think, and as a physicist, we could do that. So I think that would have been better too.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you. So there's that kind of big reveal. I think it's towards the end of the film, where you see what looks like a cluster of UAP. Now, I saw online.
There's a
Yeah.
hole there's a hole in the clouds that appears,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
then there are these little white dots in the cloud,
Yeah.
and we got, what, 13 seconds of video. We didn't have that set up properly to record longer,
Hmm.
so we only got 13 seconds. And during that 13 seconds, another dot appears there, which is really so it was we still have no idea what those dots were.
Yeah, I was going to ask you because online you
We've done some
hear.
experiments to see if there was camera artifact, and there were some camera artifacts that we've detected in working with the equipment since.
Okay. Yeah.
So is it possible that some of that is camera artifact? Some of it could be camera artifact.
But wasn't some of
It was not a bug on the lens. We tested
right?
that. We tested water droplets evaporating. We tested everything. Yeah.
But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm thinking of a different incident. But didn't you also get some sort of radar?
We did get radar data
cor-
from, yeah, we did. Yeah,
correlating with that,
we
or
got radar data that correlated to some degree with what was seen at that time. Yeah.
okay? Now, could it have been like a flock of birds or something like that?
No,
No,
not all in one place like that.
no.
It
Okay,
was all right where the hole in the clouds was.
and
There's
that's
no,
interesting
yeah,
too.
it's
Yeah.
a strange. The whole thing is still strange, and Matthew and I both are still kicking ourselves for not making sure that those FLIR cameras were running, because we would have had 8 infrared videos of what was going on, and we would have been able to tell you a lot more.
Yeah, not to get too mythic, but I mean, a lot of UFO cases are like that. I mean, you just, and this is the thing that you hear from debunkers and skeptics like Neil deGrasse Tyson. It's like, well, take a picture if you see that, and people don't realize, like,
It is hard to take a picture.
yeah, and it's hard to take a picture. It's also
and
hard to
And
have the
Kurt Jaimungal,
wherewithal.
I know, and Kurt Jaimungal, in his interview with Neil deGrasse Tyson, told the story about how they couldn't get a picture of a porcupine in a tree. And Neil deGrasse Tyson's response to that was he didn't think porcupines went in trees. Well, they do go in trees. That's ridiculous. That's the only places I've ever seen porcupines were in trees.
But that's also
But
besides the
yeah.
point. I mean, if
But it
they're
was beside the point. I
yeah,
mean, if you're having a hard time photographing a porcupine in a tree, you're going to have
right.
a hard time photographing UFO. And I always tell people, in fact, I challenged Matthew to this. I said, Albany is right by the Albany Airport, Albany International Airport. Well, it's
Yeah.
international because we go to Canada.
Mhm.
And I said, so my challenge to you is not to walk prepared, but be unprepared. But when you're walking from the parking lot to school, if you happen to see a plane, try to get a picture of it.
Yeah.
And he finally did, but it took him several tries. He said,
Right.
"Oh, I couldn't get the phone out fast enough. Oh, I forgot to get the phone out. Oh, and I couldn't get it in focus." And
Exactly.
and there were several attempts that he made, and he would show me these. I tried to get a photo of a plane. See, I didn't do it, and I said, "I want to see the tail number on that plane." and he had a hard time doing it. And we're by an airport. You see planes all the time.
Yeah.
This is not a UFO where you're stunned and shocked and possibly not thinking properly, possibly because of high electric fields that could be
Mhm.
inducing currents in your brain. So there could be other stuff going on.
Right. I mean, even your mood changes when there's like ozone in the air when a thunderstorm is coming. I
Right.
literally feel different.
You can feel it, yeah.
You can feel it. Yeah. Um, Mick West and I had, this was a while back, and I didn't continue the tweet conversation, but essentially I was trying to argue that, cameras aren't that great. They're not as great as people say that they are, that our cell phone cameras. And he said, well, what do you mean? There's, X number of pixels, you have 4K, this and that. And I'm saying it's not an apples to apples comparison what we see with our eyes and what the camera picks up.
Yeah,
It is the,
those cameras are made for getting selfies and taking, tourist shots. They're not made for wildlife photography or something far away, or airplane photography even.
yeah.
I mean,
And
I have my cameras around here somewhere. I have a 400 millimeter lens. It's this big, and
yeah.
that's the kind of camera you want. You want a camera like that, but you can't carry that around with you all the day long. It's
Right. And even if I want to just take a quick picture of like a full moon with my camera, I have to take the time to adjust the exposure, play with zooming
yeah.
in and out. By the time you do that, the moment's passed. I mean, yeah, there are a
And
number of
if you've got a
explanations.
really bright UFO, I mean, you're not going to be able to
Oh,
adjust
then
the
you can't.
exposure. You'll never get a clear picture. And
Right. Exactly.
there are reasons this doesn't work. Yeah.
You worked for NASA,
Yeah.
right? So what's your take on NASA's position with UFOs and UAP?
That's a tough one.
Because Michael Gold during the hearing, I thought was, he was kind of being neutral and safe, I felt, in his responses.
Yeah, he's in a tough place. The Aero director's in a tough place.
Sure. Yeah.
They know more than they're telling us, and they're not really in a position to tell us, and it's not easy. So while I'm frustrated half the time and often shouting at the television, I also accept the fact that they're in I don't want their job. I don't want that job. I would not want that job.
Yeah.
Now, what does not so the problem I have two problems with NASA. One is when they were asked to put their task force together, I contacted, I think I know 7 current and former NASA people who are interested in and have to some degree tried to study UAP. So I contacted all of those people and I said, have you been asked to be on this board? Have you been contacted? Has anybody asked you for advice or information? None of us were contacted at all. And it was suspicious. And we all agreed that this is a little suspicious. If you're going to have a NASA task force to look into this problem, you probably should get somebody who knows something about the problem. Now, you could argue that you want to get somebody who's agnostic, but you probably should have it balanced. You should have agnostic people and then knowledgeable people, and let us fight it out. I mean, put us in a ring and we'll battle each other, and we'll come to some conclusion.
Right.
That would be best. But none of us were contacted, so that was odd. The second thing that's odd is I know that astronauts have seen things in space.
Sure.
And people, they have been clear about it on, there are plenty of YouTube videos. I
Yeah.
got to meet Alan Bean, who was on Apollo 12,
Hmm.
landed on the moon. I talked to him, and he was on Skylab and photographed a red flashing light. This object followed them during orbit. It actually approached the Skylab for some time, followed them for part of the orbit, and then left. You don't put lights on satellites. I'm sorry. It's a light weighs something. What, 500 grams? That 500 grams is going to cost you an extra $1 million to put into space. For a flashing light, you don't need a flashing light. So satellites don't have flashing lights. So why is there a flashing light in space? Never answered. He took photographs of it. Those photographs were actually made public. They're not good photographs because he's holding the camera and it's flashing, and so it's a squiggly red line. I mean, that's all you're going to get. People send me pictures like this all the time. Oh, here's a picture of a light I took. What is it? And I say, it's a light. That's what it is. I can't tell you what the light's attached to, but it's a light. And cameras are not that great. It's really not the best instrument to be using. Yeah.
I was a little disappointed that Kirsten Gillibrand didn't call attention to the fact that the UAP quote unquote historical report had so many factual
Errors. Yeah,
inaccuracies and
it was.
errors.
I
It was
think. I
littered,
think.
not just a few. It was littered.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I once described this report as being like it was written by a disinterested eighth grader.
Mm.
That's basically the quality of that report. If you want a good report on the history, look at the French Cometa report from 1999. It's what 100 pages long. It's
Yeah.
got a lot of data, a lot of information. The French did the right thing. They did their
Right.
job.
Yeah,
Um,
they released a lot of reports too at the time, right? I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the French Cometa report is fantastic. Um, the Americans, no, we didn't, we couldn't put together a book report made by an eighth grader. We couldn't even do that.
Yeah,
It's kind of sad. Yeah.
for an estimated 22 million.
Yeah. There you
Yeah.
go. $22 million. There's your government waste right there.
Right. There you go.
I mean,
Um,
hire somebody who can write a report next time. I don't,
yeah, or just
I don't know what to tell you.
or just disclose
It's
it, and
rough.
then you don't have to fund the arrow in the first place. So,
There you go too. Yeah.
um, uh, so for those of us who are enthusiasts, independent investigators, amateur researchers, volunteers, what recommendations do you have for us? That kind of just go out there and do our own thing to help like contribute to this overall, cause and mystery.
That's a really good question. I mean, certainly if you have money to donate to the scientific efforts trying to study these things, to do science like this with real equipment, we need money, unfortunately,
Hmm.
and there is no funding opportunities. So that's kind of tough. So you can donate to UAPX, to SCU, to SUAPs, to SOL. And these are all good organizations trying to do good work. Um, and we're in communication with each other. We collaborate to some degrees,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I didn't mention the Galileo project. I don't want to forget them, or IFEX in Germany and Vasco in Sweden. Yeah, so there's a good number of projects that are trying to do good work.
Yeah, and I do want to say just a caveat there. Oftentimes, people who are fundraising or trying to get money for UFO research and projects to get lampooned or lambasted for being grifting, and but in reality, there are plenty of scientific endeavors, where I forget what the one group is that they're doing like a light sail fundraising, but
Oh,
it's
right.
yeah. These are legitimate funded scientific programs that are funded by the public, and so just because it's a UAP or UFO funded program does not mean it's not legitimate. But how do we know when we're looking at something like UAPX, whatever? How do we know if it's legit or not?
I think what I would do is I look to see if they're affiliated with the university.
Hmm.
I mean, if it's university
Mhm.
research, then we aren't. Nobody's running away with money. You can't do that.
Okay.
You couldn't get away with that. I'd lose my job. I don't want to do that. So
Totally
yeah,
understandable. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. If there's any last thoughts that you want to leave us with that I haven't covered.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to think of what else people can do. I mean, keep talking about it, and get the press to actually report on this for real instead of making jokes. So that would be useful too. Don't
Yeah.
forget that this stuff is real. This stuff's real and it's important. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
All right. And where should people go to find out more about you and support UAPX?
Oh, you can go to the UAPX website. That's a good way to go.
That's UAPexpedition.org.
UAPexpedition.org. Yes, that's correct. Yep, that's a good place to start. You can
Okay.
also Google my name and go to my university webpage too and see other things I do on exoplanets and robotics and stuff like that.
All right. Fantastic. Dr. Knuth, thank you so much. I really appreciate this
Oh, thank you for
conversation.
having me. This has been great fun.
Okay, awesome. Have a good night. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate it. Your comments, the good vibes on this channel. I feel it every week. Thank you, guys. I love seeing you in the chat. This podcast will be broadcast on the UNX network every Thursday, 11 p.m. Pacific time, 2 a.m. Eastern, Friday mornings. And as always, if you can do whatever you can to support the channel, whether that's comment down below, share, rate wherever you listen to podcasts, all that really helps. So thank you. I appreciate you so much. And until next time, everyone, peace and love, and live in the mystery.
It's good to be an earthling, and I wish more of us would think of ourselves that way.
I don't have a problem with skeptics. It's debunkers that are on some other level that I don't understand.
Essentially an inference of a change in local gravity.
Saucer-shaped craft, and they're hovering over the water.
Blue Book Special Report 14, the better the quality of the sighting, the more likely to be unexplainable.